Aye, kuwe kuwa maduwe.
Aye, kuwe maduwe.
Aye, kuwe kuwa maduwe.
Aye, kuwe maduwe.
I was going to ask what were some of the other lessons that you've learned from your family?
There were so many, and in my older age, I've had more time to actually reflect on those kind of things that I've learned. I learned very early on that my existence, my happiness, my presence was actually due to not what I did individually, but what was collectively done around me, either on my behalf or with my participation. So I learned early on that we are far more important than I am. And that was real contrary to the messages you get in this Western culture, in this Western society. It's all about I, it's all about me. But I really got the message that it's about us, it's about we. And so I learned early that it was better to give. I learned early that it was better to listen. That if you really wanted to gain knowledge, it wasn't about your talking, it wasn't about your sharing what you knew, it was about listening to what others have to say, listening to how they contribute, and then integrating that. Another lesson that I learned was that no matter what you did individually, it could never, ever amount to what the possibilities were of collective activity. I mean, I was highly engaged in sports as a kid. My mother was a former softball professional in her young days. My father always, as part of the military, always worked in an environment where it was collective. So I was allowed to participate in sports, and it was always about a team effort. I always got rewarded for my individual contributions, and I got accolades for that. But my parents always emphasized that you were able to do that because somebody else, either in basketball, passed you the ball, or somebody else set a screen for you so that you could shoot it, or somebody else got a rebound so that you could have possession of the ball. And they always reinforced what I was learning in sports, and that was, it's all about team. I was blessed as a kid to have coaches and mentors that weren't really about, okay, this is about you, but were really about team sports. And those are the lessons I learned.
That's excellent. What would you say are three of the biggest issues in the community? And I'm going to actually make that a little bit more specific, because one of the things you touched on I think would be interesting to hear more of. You just spoke about schizophrenia and you know, and those type of you know, mental health issues that right now seem to be getting much more attention, but certainly 90s, 80s, it wasn't even something that was necessarily even really brought up in, you know, mainstream conversation or anything now. So I'm curious as how have you seen that, at least the conversations around mental health evolve, and you know, especially talking about Black folks.
Well, especially since the twin pandemics of racism and COVID-19, there's been a lot more discussion around mental wellness in all communities, including our communities, in Black communities. When people, when this country and when the world saw what happened to George Floyd, of course for us, that's something that's every day when it comes to the relationship between police and many people in the Black community, many Black communities. So it was no surprise to us. But it was overwhelming, I think, in a number of ways. And people began to go out, to demonstrate, to allow themselves to feel some sort of way about what was going on. George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, the sister in Kentucky, what's her name? I'm slipping on her. Breonna Taylor. Yeah, Breonna Taylor. More recent ones in a long line of police abuse. And my sense and the association sense is that people have had it. So they really began to seek out help. And I think there have been a number of movements also to normalize seeking help, whether it's talking to someone, whether it's using some sort of technology to calm, going through mindfulness, whatever the case may be. The need to create balance has been ever present in the last few years, I think, in the black community, and I think in ways that are really helpful. That it's cool to meditate, right? That it's cool to seek your balance in the midst of horrifying conditions, right? So, I've been really, I've been heartened by black community's approach and willingness to seek mental wellness services. Yeah, because it's a tough slog. We'll go to our preachers, to the church before we'll go see a mental health specialist. And I'm not knocking church, and I'm not knocking going to pastors, right? But going to a pastor is not going to someone who is a psychotherapist and who's been trained to do that work. And especially if you've been trained by the Association of Black Psychologists in black psychology.
Yeah. What would you say are some of the main issues that are affecting the black community now or harming the black community now? Same as ever, violence. I think violence, what we do to ourselves, To answer that question, I think it's we could talk for hours really on that question alone. We could talk about the mimetic programming that is an everyday occurrence from cradle to grave when it comes to black people to accept the lie of black inferiority and white superiority. That's an ongoing problem. And if that's the case, then we learn to hate people who look like us. And we will reach out violently, right? We believe that the top three factors that contribute to violence, and this is only one part of your question, and that's the violent piece, right? It is attributed to the issue of frustration tolerance, the ability to tolerate being frustrated, the ability to express anger in a certain way, right? How we mediate anger, and how we deal with depression. When those three factors combine, we can have violent outcome. Somebody steps on somebody's tennis shoes, right, the wrong way, and then it's on, right? We're in instant fight or flight. And we're in instant fight or flight because we live in a society that maintains that for people within the black communities. Could be playing basketball and having a good game, and somebody gets filed, and then it goes south. Right.
So we believe that that's one of the issues. A major issue for me is black male-female relationships. When I'm talking to young brothers and sisters, right? And we're looking at the programming that comes up that is really detrimental to lasting relationships. When we're looking at our economics, right? Some 40 years ago, when you looked at young black men and women and separation and divorce rates, that sort of thing, 75% of it was financial, right? And so control of wealth is a serious issue within the black people. We always talk about speaking truth to power, we need to make moves so that we become the power that other people speak truth to, right? That's an issue. And so there are a number of important issues. It's hard to say which is more important than the other. It's like we have to address them all at the same time. Black philanthropy, you know, to be able to support our organizations, right, that support the community. That becomes very important. And yeah, I would say mindset, you know, going out here and understanding that we need to master a number of systems within this overall system. We need to master it. I need to, you know, European-based psychology is European-based psychology. But if I master it, then I can critically analyze it, I can critique it, and I can move on from it, right? Without mastering it, then it's just a feeling, right? And then, of course, I want to master our own stuff, too, you know. What do Africans bring to the table around this notion of psychology, right? The principles of Ma'at, and being able to instill those within our community if we act on Ma'at, right?
Wow. And it sounds like baked into that answer were a few of the solutions, or some of the solutions for that. Particularly, I think just mentioning, even earlier when you're talking about, you know, especially with Black folks approaching mental health in a different way now, and not seeing it so much as a stigma,
right?
And relying more on professionals, you know, like yourself, you know, to really unpack a lot of things, especially particularly around trauma that, you know, experience, whether from childhood, racial trauma, all these other avenues that kind of contribute to a lot of, you know, what we see as violent behavior and, you know, things of that nature.
Yeah.
So that definitely makes sense. What are some of the lessons? I know you started to speak of a few. Some of the lessons that you've learned from your family.
Well, I guess the main thing I would just have to say the value of education. And my daughter made an interesting comment that, given the fact that my family, on one level or another, has been educated since the 1890s, and knowing the nature of color and class privileges, she surmised that, wow, we should be a lot more wealthy than we are right now. What happened? And it made me think. I'm like, that is a good question. Because on some levels we were positioned to be, you know, because there's some little perks and advantages in there that some people have taken advantage of. But I would like to say that it's because my family focused on education. And given the fact that both of my grandparents, all of my grandparents were very poor, they weren't thinking, I don't think, of wealth. They were thinking of having enough, or maybe just a little bit more. And education for them was valued because education meant that you could look a white man or a white woman in the eye and speak to them on equal terms, and in your heart at least, know that you are of equal value. So education related more to dignity and preventing the humiliation and disrespect that our people were subjected to on a day-to-day basis. And so I did value that. And I guess, too, the idea of working. You know, I saw everybody working, men, women, you know. I didn't have to work as a child, but I've had a job since I was 16 years old, you know. Everybody worked. And work, the problem is that we weren't taught in terms of investing and money and the science of money, you know. I was still brought up with the myth that if you work hard, you will get rich or you will be very materially successful. And that's not necessarily true. The people who work the hardest are often the poorest people in the society. And wealth has virtually nothing to do with work. But I was also given a sense of faith too, because my grandfather was a minister, but he was also a Christian scientist, so he was an independent thinker. And that kind of led me to thinking and questioning some of the deeper aspects of the universe and how things function.
I hear that. What are, you'd say, the top 3 things that you feel are the most harmful to the Black community?
Well, it's hard to have only a top 3, but I'll try to break it down. For me, poor education is one of the hugest deterrents for our African people. And I don't just mean the quality, whether the school has resources, or whether it has a nice building, or whether there are lots of books. I also mean in terms of the nature of the education. My experience growing up, I went to all Black schools up until high school. I went to schools like Carter G. Woodson or Crispus Attucks or Ebony Worthing. And in those schools were all Black teachers. And what we learned about was Black culture as well. We learned about our Black heroes and sheroes. And I was able to internalize those aspects of my ancestors that I could represent. Education in general tries to deny all of that. And so I think the quality of education has to be improved, and it has to be developed and nurtured by us, not just by white culture or Western culture. I think the second on the list for me is economic opportunity, that there have been severe, tremendous efforts at preventing us from being able to attain economic wealth, whether it's the inability to own land, whether it's poor education, whether it's poor access to quality health care, whether it's non-access to jobs, only being relegated to manual labor and those kinds of things. So economic opportunity is the second. And the third, I'm a recovering clinical psychologist. I think that we also are victims of a tremendous amount of brainwashing. And I remember as a kid growing up in Texas, there were lots of billboards, and auto places, cars would sell things by having beautiful white women sitting on the hood with some statement about you need to own this car, when the image was, well, you need to have a white woman kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that was a way to propagandize the importance of whiteness over the importance of being who you were and relating to the people around you. So I think we're victims of a tremendous amount of brainwashing to think that white is right, that I is more appropriate than we, and that you need to be in a position where you're able to take what's yours and take what belongs to you, as opposed to having value by giving to others. Wow. So I think those are 3 things.
Wow, no, I'm glad you were able to, articulate that. And especially in the last one, how do you really, try to fix like brainwashing, especially on such like a large level, with our community?
Yeah. Well, when I think about it personally, I think about the identity development that I was able to experience, where I had parents that were reinforcing who I was, giving me evidence of others around me and others who came before me, who contributed, who made a difference, so that I could internalize those things. What we have to do is create our own narrative of who we are, and not create a narrative based on what somebody else thinks we are or should be. So I really think the way to correct that is, again, for us to grab hold of and take charge of and responsibility for identity development among our children and even our adults. So it's recreating our narrative, I think.
I hear that. What would you say are the top 3 things that are most harmful to the Black community?
There are a number, but still on that list is self-hate, lack of understanding who we are in the broader African sense, and at times an unwillingness to go beyond our known parameters and seek out knowledge of the world. I think those are some of the things still, just like Carter G. Woodson said, our still main barriers are mental and emotional. Now, of course, too, we still suffer from daily trauma and the historical trauma that we've experienced. Yet we have numerous examples, collectively, organizationally, movement-wise, and individually, of people who've overcome. So I do feel that in many respects, the people who are on the bottom, they hold the secrets, because if they rise up, things change for everybody. So at this point, I feel like between us, Native Americans, Mexicans and brown people and immigrants, the disabled, all of us have a stock. Poor white people, conscious white people, you know. I kind of agree with Comandante Marcos of the Zapatistas. It's us versus them. And us is like 98%. And so I'm still encouraged. I feel that any program, though, today that a Black organization has must include some analysis on climate change, because climate change is the one thing that is going to unite all the peoples of the world. Otherwise, we will perish. So I think there's a lot of things facing us that if we continue to use the ingenuity and creativity and resourcefulness that we've shown, we'll be okay.
I heard that. It sounds like in part of your answer around that in terms of fixing things was in terms of uniting around like class issues, you know, rather than, you know, just obviously around color lines and things of that nature.
No question. Yeah. Capitalism is a big enemy. It's not just race. You have class, you have race, and we got to deal with the gender issues. The issues of trans and gay people are not going to go away. And so Black people have to embrace, and we've always had an ambivalent embrace of everybody. Everybody in a Black family knows somebody in their family that was gay. It wasn't openly talked about, but for the most part, people were accepted. But they couldn't really be themselves. So we have to get to where we can embrace all of who we are and accept some of the leadership from some of our young queer women leaders now who are doing the bulk of the scholarly and intellectual weightlifting amongst our people right now.